Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode in our series In Pursuit of the Theory of Knowledge. In today's discourse, we shall continue our examination of Schopenhauer's epistemology, moving deeper into the first class of representations, those complete empirical representations that are required through the excitation of our senses and the subsequent work of our understanding, our brain. In our previous episode, we introduced the first principle necessary for any meaningful knowledge, the convergence of subject and object. Just as ancient materialism, which is the most consistent in starting with the object or matter, overlooked the fact that with any object, the subject is automatically posited also, and therefore any knowledge about the object is conditioned by the subject, the knower. The modern theologians and spiritualists who are attempting to start from the subject, whatever name they choose to give it, be it God, absolute, unconditioned, or ego, are making the same mistake while attempting to spin the whole world out of itself. Only the proper application of the subject-object convergence, the first principle for any meaningful knowledge, is capable to solve this apparent dualism between the material and the ideal, elegantly cutting the Gordian knot. Before we move further, let us apply the principle of convergence of subject and object to ourselves, thereby resolving yet another ancient riddle: the illusory dualism between the body and soul. As human beings, we simultaneously exist as subjects and objects. On one hand, as conscious individuals, we are perceivers, subjects observing the empirical world, a world that becomes our idea or representation. This representation arises not merely from raw sensations, but from the structuring activity of our brain, the understanding, which imposes upon sensation the fundamental a priori laws of space, time, and causality. Yet, at the same time, our physical bodies, extended in space and composed of matter, are themselves objects within this empirical world. For each conscious individual, the body is the immediate object through which all other objects are perceived, binding us unavoidably to the eternal causal chain of the physical universe. Therefore, the so-called soul is nothing more than the perceiving subject itself, the knower, while our physical form remains part of the material world. So, what are these fundamental forms of our knowledge that turn the highly subjective and limited sensations to objective perception? In order to properly answer this question, we need to travel back in time to uncover the origins of Master Schopenhauer's philosophy. We must turn to his ideological predecessor, whose revolutionary ideas form the bedrock upon which Schopenhauer builds. We need to talk about Immanuel Kant. In his signature masterpiece, The Critique of Pure Reason, Immanuel Kant enumerates these a priori modes of our understanding as our inner and outer sense, namely the space and time. In the section devoted to transcendental aesthetic, from the Latin trans, meaning beyond, and scandere, to climb, and from the Greek aesthesis and its Latin derivative aestheticus, meaning sensation or perception, Immanuel Kant delivers one of the most precious gifts of philosophical and proto-scientific thought to humanity as the highest expression of his genius. Conceptually deeper than Newton and long before Maxwell or Einstein, it is also the very foundation upon which Schopenhauer builds his first class of representations and his entire theory of knowledge. In his critique of Kantian philosophy, Master Schopenhauer opens his discussion by quoting Voltaire. It is the privilege of true genius, and especially of the genius who opens a new path, to make great mistakes with impunity. He then continues, the perfected masterpiece of a truly great mind will always have a profound and far-reaching influence on all of humankind, so much so that one cannot calculate how far into distant centuries and lands its elevating effect may extend. Before we move into the a priori forms of our understanding, space, time, and causality, a priori meaning knowledge that arises independently of all experience, let us summarize what we have learned so far. Master Schopenhauer warns us against thinking that empirical reality, the intuitive world, exists independently of our cognitive faculties and our perception. He says, one must have been forsaken by all the gods to imagine that the intuitive real world out there would exist entirely objectively and independently of us, and then enter into our head through mere sense perception. For what a poor thing mere sense perception really is. Even in the noblest of our senses, it is nothing more than a local, subjective feeling, a process within the organism itself, localized to each individual body, which as such can contain nothing objective, nothing even remotely resembling an intuition that creates the objective perception of the empirical world. Only when the understanding, a function not of isolated, delicate nerve ends, but of the cleverly constructed brain, weighing 3 to 5 pounds, is set in motion and brings into play the law of causality, does a mighty transformation take place, whereby, from the subjective sensation, the objective perception arises. There are 3 fundamental a priori forms through which every appearance must pass in order to become knowable: space, time, and causality. However, the 2 primordial forms that shape every experience, space and time, are only perceptible when filled. That which fills them and allows their perceptibility is matter. Now, the principle of permanence of matter teaches us that matter cannot come into being or be annihilated. It can only change form. These changes in the states of matter, in time and space, are governed by the law of causality. The entire essence of time is succession. All arithmetic, every act of counting, rests upon perception of time as a repeated affirmation of unity, which we mark each time with another word. These are numerals. When we say 4 plus 1 equals 5, we affirm unity 4 times, then yet again, and we call that 5th affirmation 5. Now, repetition is only possible through succession. Therefore, counting is only possible by means of time. As an expression of our inner sense, time, whose essence is succession, expresses itself within us through the sequential nature of our conscious experience. Master Schopenhauer proclaims that as for the immediate presence of representations in our consciousness, the subject, the knower, remains under the rule of time alone. This means that only one representation can be present to the subject at any given time, although that one may be very complicated. This aligns with findings in cognitive neuroscience about attention and working memory, which suggest that while we can process multiple stimuli, our conscious focus is limited and tends to be serial, one representation, one at a time. The entire essence of space is position. Position is the mutual determination of every part of space by all the other parts simultaneously. All geometry rests upon this network of coexisting relations. This means that every single defined point in space, with a specific position, coexists with and is mutually determined by all other existing points in space. A triangle's three angles, as an example, co-determine one another immediately. It is impermissible to declare one point in space to be cause or effect of another point in space, because, unlike the representation of time, where all things follow one another, in mere space all things are side by side, for in pure space there is no succession. The intuition of space, our outer sense, comes into play when our understanding applies the a priori form of causality, evaluating sensations in our body as effects caused by something outside our organism. From there, the notion of external world arises. Using the few incomplete data provided by our senses and by the a priori forms of our understanding, the brain constructs the external world of objects that fill the three-dimensional space. Long before Albert Einstein formalized the notion of space-time continuum, Master Schopenhauer correctly observed that space and time, as fundamental structures of our knowledge, are quite different from one another. If time would be the only form of our empirical representations, there would be no coexistence, therefore no permanence or duration. The permanence of an object is only recognized by contrast with changes taking place in coexisting objects. But in mere time, there is no coexistence, because all things follow one another in sequential order. On the other hand, if space would be the only form of our empirical representations, there would be no change, for change or alteration is succession of states, and succession is only possible in time. For this reason, Master Schopenhauer rightly insists on the intimate union of time and space brought together by our understanding, our intellect, which creates this complex of representations of the empirical world, where, on the one hand, matter remains permanent despite the unending flow of time, and on the other hand, the states of matter constantly change despite the rigid immobility of space. In our next episode, we will examine more closely the difference between understanding, which, according to Master Schopenhauer, we humans share with all animal species, and abstract thinking, Schopenhauer's second class of representations, which until recently, with the onset of artificial intelligence, belonged solely to humans, making us masters of the universe. For now, please support us by liking and subscribing to our content and revisit our previous episodes dedicated to Schopenhauer's theory of knowledge. Until we meet again, sapere aude. Have the courage to use your own reason.